Welcome back. Welcome back. Good to see everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Happy Thursday. It's good to see some the team of panelists that we have here today, and really cool to see some familiar faces here in 2021. So this is our first event from RevCult here in 2021, and I think it's going to be a great one. Share a lot of expertise with some real experts in the field, and Pete and I always joke how cool it is to collaborate with folks like you all. So should be a good one. Let's do a quick sound check. Let's go, Pat. Are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm happy to be here, and thanks for inviting me.
Good stuff. Good to see you. I see Pete next. Pete, are you with us?
I am here. I am here and pleased to be.
Excellent. Thomas, you with us?
Hey, how's it going? I'm here. I'm from the South. We don't know how to handle ice, so I fell down and hurt myself.
Yeah. So Thomas is here, and if you hear him groaning, it's not because of what I said, and that that's the disclaimer. It specifically wasn't what Brian said, if if anyone's wondering. And then lastly, we've got Jonathan as well. Jonathan, quick sound check. Are you good to go?
I'm here, good to go. Apologize for not being on video, but I've always been told I have a face for radio, so let's keep it that way.
All good, all good. So cool. So we've got a great setup of discussion topics. We did get some questions in advance, and so we'll make sure that we interject those as part of the dialogue. As always, we have the hat raffle. So hat raffle towards the end. And I think since everybody's good, let's get right into it, and I can try to stay out of the way here. Why don't we go around and do some intros with the team, and actually, Nicole, if you can go back just to make sure everyone knows context and what informs their perspective. And so, Thomas, why don't we start with you? Kind of what brings you to the dialogue today, and what informs your perspective?
Yeah, so I'm Thomas Davis. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Terminix. We're an international company. I've got about 20 years of experience in InfoSec, so I'm hopefully to share some interesting stuff today. So thanks for having me.
Great. How about Pat?
Hi, Pat Benoit. I have the pleasure of leading the global cyber governance risk compliance and the business information security office at CBRE. So looking forward to the discussion.
Good to see you. And then Jonathan, how about yourself?
Jonathan Hay, Chief Information Security Officer with Cadence Bank. We are a regional commercial bank in the Southeast, and along with Thomas, I have about 20 plus years in some form of technology and information security.
Excellent. Pete, for those that may not remember you.
Yep, still Pete. Yeah, I'm Pete. I serve as the Chief Product and Solutions Officer here at RevCult, so I kind of oversee everything that we do for security and governance from products and services and solutions, what we do basically. And so really looking forward to having this conversation with the other gentlemen on the call and learning more about what they've got going on in their world. Be fun today.
Excellent. And I think what's interesting. What was that? Excuse me? I'm Brian, and I'll try to not make. I'll try to stay out of the way. I'm here with RevCult. I'll moderate today's conversation and try to keep us on the rails from a timing standpoint, because I know there's a lot of knowledge to share across the group here. What's really cool is the cross section of industries and experiences, and I think that's what's unique about Salesforce is specifically is where RevCult focuses is it applies almost everywhere. And so I think it'll be really interesting dialogue.
And I specifically didn't say anything about years experience because 20 years ago I was still in grade school. So
yeah, I didn't want to make everybody feel old either. Yeah.
Love it. All right. Well, let's if we can scroll forward here, we did ask lots of questions, or one of the questions as part of the registration. Were people interested in lessons from 2020 key takeaways from or key priorities for 2021. We know the pandemic fatigue is real, but there still is a lot of pain and a lot of tough times, and that's had an impact on everybody. And so maybe let's just touch on 2020 real quickly. And Pat, why don't we start with you? What was the biggest lesson or takeaway that you had, and maybe on the flip side, what was the coolest thing that 2020 provided you?
So, I mean, I would point immediately to, you know, the idea that the more things change, the more they remain the same. And so the big takeaway from 2020 is with all the pandemic, we should have realized once again that change is constant. It's the only constant we have, and that, you know, the farther we get away from basics and focus on shiny objects instead and the next new thing in the world, the worse off we are in an event like this. If we were paying attention to the basics, then you were in good shape as a company. If you had forgotten your basics and you were chasing the latest trend in software, then you probably had problems supporting remote access. And so that was the big thing for me.
Got it. Love it. Basics versus shiny objects. How about from your perspective, Thomas?
I see y'all got the picture of Patrick from 20 years ago up here, so that was a good move.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me was is have a strategy. I mean, even as an InfoSec organization, we shouldn't just be reactive to the business. We should have our own strategy, things that we want to accomplish. And you know, we were prepared for the remote work just because we had a strategy in that. And also, you know, don't let good be the enemy of great. You know, be flexible in these times, because at the end of the day, you know, everyone, you know, we're struggling. Everyone had to go home. You know, how can we make our business run? How can we be successful in this world? And that doesn't mean you get to check every box and secure everything to the nth degree that you want. But again, you know, be valuable to your business.
Makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. And yeah, the strategy, yeah, makes a ton of. How about from your standpoint, Jonathan?
I'm going to echo and build on what Thomas said. So, love the analogy around good as the enemy of great. And, you know, from my perspective, what it really taught me is to make sure that you have extreme agility to be able to respond to events like this in the future. So, you know, from an information security perspective, looking at, you know, cloud-first solutions that were natively built in the cloud, you know, affords you that agility as opposed to, you know, some traditional legacy security vendors who are trying to adopt a cloud strategy, but still are either entrenched in old processes or just their technology ability isn't there to meet the demands of the agility. So I think that's, you know, some of my takeaways is planning for the unknown in the future and having the agility to pivot when, you know, faced with situations like this in the future. Really increases our flexibility to meet the demand of the business. So I think that was my key takeaway for 2020.
Hey, Brian, I'm going to jump out on a limb and add to, you know, Thomas made me recall this. One of the other big things that came to mind as a result of this is that I think we all learned that building a security culture and having people think about security extends way past just the office building you walk into and the network that you're on. And we all have to think now about how do we build that culture in the people's personal life. And if we build it in their personal lives, they'll bring that to work with them.
Yeah, and also, you know, being ready. You know, back to having that strategy. You know, we were able to shut down our call centers. Now, not only did we send people home, we sold the buildings. We turned our leases in. We pulled all our equipment out of them. And we didn't have to buy anything. We were ready. You know, bye, see y'all later. You know, go home. Some people had to install a VP agent. Other people didn't. They were ready to go. So again, I just don't be reactive to the business. You know, again, have a plan, have a strategy, and yeah, it makes a difference.
Makes a ton of sense. Man, those are our four. We started with we set the bar really high, or you all set the bar really high right in the beginning. Extreme agility, good as the enemy of great, having a strategy, and basics versus shiny objects. Maybe taking that concept of extreme agility, Jonathan, how do you take that, or what do you do differently now and as you look into 2021, are there things that, some of the changing environment that we experienced last year has informed for even more extreme agility?
Yeah, I would say that now that, we take that into more consideration with dealing with vendors, right? So I won't call out specific vendor names, but a recent proof of value with two competing solutions, one that is a cloud native solution built in the cloud. Other is a legacy information security vendor who are just now transitioning their product line into a unified cloud solution. And just the differences between the two, right? Even just from a project management perspective, as they were engaged with us during the proof of value, it's really apparent just how quickly that they can execute on a solution, but also how quickly that they're introducing new features and functionality into their product. And I think we'll see that more in information security, is a greater focus on agility to be able to change security controls. As we start to face more supply chain attacks in the industry, it's no longer, I think, very prudent to be stuck in a single solution or so ingrained in the solution that it's going to be extremely painful to remove that solution from your environment when there have threats and vulnerabilities that cause undue risk. And then also solutions that are cloud native seem to be in more forward thinking, just seem to have a better user experience, right? So it's always our goal is to remove friction between security and the rest of the organization. So if your experience is seamless, you never have to think about it. And so those are kind of the two core competencies that we look at now in those two lenses when we're evaluating security products and vendors.
Interesting. So Pete, what's your take on 2021? I know you've got some perspective here too. How would you add?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I think back to last year, one of the things that I think about a lot is resiliency and the maturity that people had that they didn't know that they had. We had very few panicked conversations when stuff went sideways, right? When things are shutting down, we had very few the sky is falling conversations, but we had a lot of adaptive conversations. How do we take what we've already been doing and adapt it to this current situation that we're in? That was really nice. And I think as we go into 2021, people that we work with, or people that I've been working with, are taking that resiliency forward and owning that. And it's really, really, really cool to see the way that they're able to, the organization is used to it now. They're all bought in. Everybody's in on InfoSec at this point, and they're able to make a difference on a go forward basis. So, and I think it was Pat that said, I think one of the biggest things is everybody kind of needs to be in on it, and it's your personal life carries into business, right? And people are in on it now, and they get it, and I think it's gonna make a lot of things better in people's personal lives and in business. And I do think that another really big thing that I'm excited about go forward is one of the things that it highlighted is almost every company at some point already had remote employees that were kind of an exception, right? And so it was easier to say oh yeah, but that's just Steve in Colorado, so we'll carve out an exception there. But now it's everybody all over the world, right? And so I think we ended up in a much more secure state, and I'm really excited about it. And going forward, it's not going to get easy, but it's going to be a more informed conversation with your business constituents.
Yeah. And Brian, so if I could step back to add on to what Jonathan was saying with regard to the agility, everything, I agree with everything that's been said about agility up to this point. But one thing I want to point out is it has become such a cliche buzzword now that it's much like using the terms AI or ML or anything else. That it's one of my podcast buddies, host says it's one of those words you want to take out in the backyard and bury in a hole. But agility implies simply speed of action. And the flaw in that is, in my mind, is that we often overlook is there any value to that action, and is there any efficiency to the action, or is it just action for the sake of action being faster? And so if we don't analyze and put in proper context for our constituents, our stakeholders, that we want agility with value that comes from that agility, other than it's a bigger, better, faster problem, then it doesn't create any value in and of itself.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, agility is the, consultants throughout the world are talking agility and using the word, and it means it's amazingly powerful, but only when applied appropriately. And
yeah, running off the cliff faster doesn't necessarily mean that you should still run off the cliff. So
that's all right. That's all right. How about you, Tom? What's the agile model that you use in your security operations to deal with the reality of 2021?
Well, as just a tech geek, and I got into this about the time that the internet was becoming a thing. The things that are happening today are the things we always kind of envisioned. Like I can order food from anywhere and it'll deliver it to my house. I can go pick up this. I can, and it was like overnight companies had to innovate and really push into new directions. And honestly, it felt like we were inching along there for many, many years. And so all of a sudden it was like, hey, we have to change our business today to survive. And so, and so I just keep thinking about that and where we're going and pushing more to the cloud. And well, maybe we don't need a data center. Maybe we don't need branches. Maybe we don't need massive headquarters. And these are questions that all companies are asking themselves. So, but that changes the landscape for us. So, where we used to have be able to protect everything behind our perimeter or our firewalls, that doesn't work anymore because everyone's outside of your environment unless you're doing constant VPN or other avenues that way. And so what it really means for 2021 for us is it gave our business and our people confidence that we can do this. We had some of our best quarters ever of being fully remote. So it gave the business confidence, it gave us confidence. So that allows us to push even more. Let's even push more into the cloud and do more. And what does that mean for an InfoSec team? Well, we got to have visibility into the cloud. What's going on? What are those activities? How do we monitor them? How do we respond to these threats? Now there's new threats, obviously phishing was ramped up last year and there was all kinds of things that were happening. But I think that's the biggest takeaway to push into 2021 is continue to push envelopes, continue to try new things, but from a security standpoint, we have to be able to measure things. We have to be able to, and so if I can't see what's going on, how am I going to prevent it? How am I going to react to it? And so I think that's really been the focus for us is just to say, this is real, we're here, and how do we get better at what we're doing?
Makes a ton of sense. Makes a ton of sense. So I guess, Nicole, why don't we go to the poll question and come back to some of the items that were brought up earlier related to kind of a corporate culture, or just a culture in general that embeds security into the operating process, security by design, and maybe at a tactical level. Why don't we start with you, Pat, at a tactical level? What are the things that you're doing internally or just personally to drive a security by design mindset and to make it a cultural thing as opposed to an afterthought that's a checkbox, almost too late in the process?
Sure. And that whole too late thing, brings up another kind of cliche phrase, shifting left. And we view that from the point of view that we try and drive involvement and engagement of security, delivery owners. I have a service delivery model on my team, so my services are delivered to various stakeholders, whether it be clients or internal stakeholders. And so, we're trying to shift that conversation as deep into the beginning of everything as possible. For example, with the Business Information Security Office, which is typically has been a very logistical turn seat kind of role between the business unit and the global cybersecurity. I said, no, it's got to be shifted into the sales process. So I'm the senior security executive that sits on the sales pursuit team and sits in the account management team and actively, engages with the clients early. And that's the same with virtually everything that we do. So it's looking for those opportunities to get the CISO and or representative of the CISO in front of every aspect of the company as early as you possibly can in any initiative or project or process.
Yeah, and I guess, Jonathan, is that a similar process, and what are the hurdles or obstacles with doing that successfully from what you've seen over at the bank?
I'd agree with that. Actually the cliches part of our actual information security values is the shift left, and that information security is everybody's job in the organization, right? So, it's more about a cultural mindset in the entire organization to take, security practices very seriously and integrate it into the culture. So, but agreed that, forming those relationships with lots of business partners and making sure that they understand the value that you bring to the table is very important, right? I think it's a good day when a line of business partner comes to you for something that they are thinking about, instead of you hearing it in a committee at some point, or in the design phase, right? So, forming those relationships with lines of business and those product owners, is integral to the success of information security. And then also, making sure you're having two-way dialogue as well, right? It is your job to be savvy in things, technology and information security, and bring new concepts to the table to meet their direction that they're going with products and services, right? So, having those conversations about, looking at product roadmaps and things that we're doing internally, and seeing where new technology and security capabilities could plug in alongside the business strategy, and making sure that you're having those constant conversations with them and educating them on what information security is doing for them behind the scenes that they might not know about, right? And showing them how much value you're delivering to the organization through, metrics and reporting. So, but agree with everything that's been said so far.
Makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and how about Thomas? The results on the slide here, is this consistent with what you would have expected in terms of, for those that aren't on the video, the poll results show 45% of individuals think that info security is responsible, and 27% of individuals think that everyone is responsible for info security in an organization. Does that surprise you, Thomas? Or is it consistent with what you think?
No, it does. It doesn't surprise me, but it does in the same sense. I think historically, people didn't necessarily view InfoSec as their responsibility, but I think the rise in phishing, more and more exploit of code, the developers were right. Developers don't want to end up in the news either. So I'm not the only one that's going to get fired if something happens, and I think people are realizing that. So if the old way of come kiss the ring, and I may or may not let you go into production, that doesn't really work anymore. And I think you really got to make it valuable to your business. You have to be able to translate, to your audience. So if you're talking to developers about writing code, you need to speak developer. If you're talking to the business of why, we need to not do certain things because they're risky, you need to be able to speak in dollars and cents. You need to be able to speak in operational business language as well. So I think it's really about everyone's involvement from the top down, and be involved and help drive a mature program. So this is awesome.
And Brian, I'm gonna let my OCD play the words have meaning card and say that I agree with the results, but from a who's accountable point of view, I think it's almost always going to be the CISO or the CIO. Now, if you say who's responsible, now that's everybody.
Yeah, that's a good catch. That's a good catch, and it does change the meaning of the question materially. It does change the meaning of the question materially.
Yeah.
So if we were to flow those concepts forward around innovation and cloud, why don't we go one more here if we could, Nicole? And I know there's some questions that came in, but we'll take those at the end. So speed of innovation, security, shifting left into that process. I guess why don't we start with you, Pete? What are you seeing, and how are the leading edge customers really thinking about this and applying tools to be able to do it, to do both successfully?
Yeah, it's been really interesting because one of the things that we have seen is not a slowdown in innovation. I mean, by any stretch. If anything, accelerated innovation and a push towards more in the cloud and some of the stuff that's already been mentioned by the other folks on the call. So as innovation has either continued or sped up, what we have seen is more of a security by design approach, though. We've seen more people kind of involving security in the design phases out of the gate. Like, okay, cool, but we know that this is going to be accessed in the field, or we know that this is going to be accessed from people's homes. So how can we really control that early? So it's actually been really, really cool. And I mean, people sometimes have a hard time knowing what they're doing, right? And so we've spent a lot of time trying to focus on how to embed that monitoring into the design phase from a programmatic perspective and a tooling perspective. But people are all about it and are still moving really, really fast. So it's been great to see.
Yeah, and I think that that innovation, Jonathan, on the other buzzwords, cloud security posture management, DevSecOps. How are you managing the migration to the cloud and leveraging the innovation and security by design into the process left?
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that I think is has been kind of a good practice that we've adopted for innovation is understanding the risk of what we're about to do, right? So whether we're looking at adopting a new cloud service or building something in a cloud service provider, making sure that we have a good understanding of what inherent risk we have and what we're doing, and how do we decrease that risk while increasing our speed, right? So, it could be one thing to say that we're going to spin up, let's say for Salesforce, for instance, it's completely fine that we're building out our instance, but no customer data is present within the environment, making sure that we're iteratively maturing the security controls in the environment while being cognizant of when we're going to migrate let's say sensitive data to this. And we've done that across some numerous cloud service providers, taking that iterative approach of understanding that, again, back to the phrase is making sure that we're having security by design, practices and principles in the actual design phases, but also having the understanding that design doesn't have to be completed, at the gate, right? So that could be an iterative process across the implementation, but everybody has the understanding that there are toll gates in place when we make major decisions, when we're starting to think about promotion into production and promoting sensitive data sets into that environment, that information security needs to sign off from a compliance perspective before we cross that toll gate.
And Brian, I think perspective plays a big part here too, because when we traditionally talk about migrating into the cloud, the perspective is we're trying to move our applications, whether they be corporate or revenue generating, from on-prem into a cloud and offering them out to the clients. But I think we have a really great opportunity also to look at it from a different perspective, which is a lot of our back office solutions and things that used to be on-prem are not just migrating into our cloud. We're getting SaaS services provided by a number of different vendors. So what's happened in my mind is it's decentralized our ability to monitor directly. We can't just wrap up the data center and say, okay, we got all these controls and they can see everything happening within the data center. We now have to look at products that will allow us to monitor inbound, outbound access from our network to various cloud SaaS providers. So it's really a pretty big challenge to now think in terms of it's decentralized rather than the other perspective, which is we're centralizing into the cloud from on-prem.
Yeah, yeah, Thomas, I know you want to jump in. Maybe I'll add a little bit of context to that, based on what Pat said. So SaaS versus PaaS is an interesting thing that we should explore. And maybe one other idea, if it makes sense, is to think about, the concept of all data should be stored and is good for analytics versus what is the right data to store and keep based on risk. So go ahead, Thomas.
I'm going to piggyback a little on the last slide as well, because I think that companies have to innovate or they're going to die. And there are a lot of companies that didn't make it through COVID, and is that because they didn't innovate before COVID, or they weren't able to react and innovate during? Only those companies can answer those questions. But to be innovative, also you have to have a culture of learning, and people have to be committed to learning and trying new things. And sometimes that's gonna it potentially cause problems in your security posture. So I think from a security perspective, we're not only trying to stay out in front of the Russians or the nation state hackers or the Nigerians or whoever, but we've got to stay in front of the next programming language and the next cloud solution, and because they're going to come at you faster than you think. Don't wait until the developer is telling you about the new AWS service that just came out that they're going to turn on today. You should already know it, or at least know of it. But I think, but at the same time, it goes back to be able to measure things. It goes back to risk management. So, what type of data is out there? Where are you putting it? So, I think, because in the day, right, we're trying to protect our data, trying to protect whether that's customer data, our own, or intellectual property. We're trying to keep systems up and running. But I would just say, in general, you've got to measure what you're doing. Be transparent, with your management team and your executives and your board, because they're ultimately going to help be responsible and help drive this in a particular direction or not. So yeah, I would just say, in general, yeah, continue to innovate, but be able to measure what you're doing and the risk associated with those things.
I think one thing that's really interesting from an information security professional perspective as well, that's almost like an assumed because of our panel that we have here today, but really knowing what these systems actually are is a huge, huge thing to overcome. No, again, I think it was Pat that said, like, there's like dozens or potentially more than dozens of different systems kind of throughout your ecosystem that you're dealing with. And really understanding what they are, and back to semantics as well, software as a service versus a platform as a service, and knowing that, historically when we had these conversations a few years ago, specifically to Salesforce, this is what we end up spending most of our time talking about, was, oh yeah, it's a SaaS solution that, there's some, they do servicing there or something, or just the sales team uses it or whatever. But, really understanding that it's a platform that most organizations have really built some highly customized offerings on, as well as really knowing that data. So you can't just dismiss it out of hand because you're like, oh, well, just the sales team uses that. Well, so what are they putting in there? Really understanding the information that's stored inside the system and what the system actually is. I think we've seen leaps and bounds over the last 3 or 4 years. And it's a critical thing to keep in your mind as an information security professional, that until you really deeply understand what a system actually is it a platform? Is it infrastructure? Is it software? Until you kind of get that piece, you really can't have a fully informed conversation about protecting the information stored within it.
Come on, Pete, you just said we have to go back to basics and pay attention to asset management. I'm not sure that that's going to fly.
I know. What was I thinking? But yeah. No, but it is those fundamental things of really knowing what you're talking about. To your point, yeah. Sounds really basic, but knowing what you're talking about is a really great first step and can be overlooked because there's just so much going on.
And the SaaS and PaaS question is back to a matter of perspective. Consumers are worried generally about SaaS, the SaaS side of things, because they're consuming the service. Providers are the ones that are focusing on, are we doing IaaS or are we doing PaaS? Consumers kind of don't care for the most part, as long as they get the service delivered.
I think that's a really good point. And I think from an information security perspective, it's very easy to say, okay, well, this solution is a SaaS solution, so they own these layers of the shared responsibility
Correct.
model. But as soon as it kind of crosses that barrier to platform and you're building custom solutions on top of it, you now own a little bit more of that shared kind of responsibility model, right? And it's just that understanding, I think can go really, really, really far. Yeah.
And you know, I'll plug in RevCult here too. I think, you know, it's about checks and balances as well. And you know, back to keep harped on metrics and measurements, but you know, hey, we're doing some stuff in Salesforce. We think we're doing the right thing. We're not sure. You know, let's bring in someone regularly to kind of overlook what we're doing to make sure we're not drifting away from the things that we were trying to accomplish or the posture that we were trying to have. So you know, the tools and the services, those things help us, again, kind of give us a maturity score or help us understand where the risk is. And you have to do that constantly because the risk is constantly changing. So, and your code's constantly changing. And every, you know, data could be here one day and there the next. So you know, be dynamic, don't be static, and try to have checks and balances in those processes.
Yeah. When Brian called out earlier the idea of what data should we keep, and do we keep it all, and do we for analytics and everything else, and I think you know, something like RevCult gives you the ability, as Thomas was saying, to identify what data you actually have, which goes back to this whole asset management kind of idea. And once you've identified it, you can take multiple approaches to security. Too often our security approach is always, well, we need to keep it, therefore we have to secure it with some kind of controls, wrap it somehow. But you know, a different approach to data security is, you know, maybe we only need to keep certain non-confidential, non-personal data type elements to be able to do our analytics. So if we sanitize the rest of it so that there is nothing restricted, confidential, proprietary in the data, then do we have to secure it at quite the same level? Probably not. So you have to look at both sides of that too.
Yeah, context certainly matters. Context does matter, and the type of data and you know, how it's governed internally, regulatory, whatever, you know, that makes a big difference. And I think you know, Salesforce, the interesting thing on the slide here, so it sounds like you know, there's a lot of folks that are thinking Salesforce as a mission critical system, and it's doing much more than what it used to be X number of years ago as a Rolodex in the clouds. And you know, thinking, you know, Jonathan, you know, in the banking industry, you know, Salesforce is doing very robust things. You know, what was the driver on your side, Jonathan, and when did Salesforce become something that, you know, was under your purview and something that, you know, was important?
So back to, you know, the comment about speed and agility for our bankers, right? So, you know, it's becoming a very important differentiator in our products and services, right? To be able to service loans and be able to service clients and customers faster, and with a competitive advantage over, you know, much larger financial institutions who have deeper pockets from an operations perspective, right? So it kind of gives us some of those same capabilities, and for us to be able to create new opportunities internally for our you know, revenue generating partners. And so ultimately that's, you know, what's, you know, our driver for Salesforce. So, you know, it provides us that opportunity just to be a better experience for our clients and consumers. And then also back to, you know, points about data. You know, data, as everybody knows, data is the new gold, right? So, you know, as we can import more data about our client and consumer behavior into the platform, the better we are at targeting them for additional products and services. So, you know, it's just provided us a tremendous wealth of information.
Data is the new gold. Data is the new gold. Yeah, and it's a tremendous platform that enables innovation and that agility. And I think you know, if you look at Pat, what you know, the you know, given the industry that you're in, the fact that you've been able to apply an agile model and you know, overcome, you know, challenges that maybe some other industries didn't face. Do you envision, and does the organization, you know, how does that enablement of innovation for Salesforce in a secure way. Has that been a critical element to the success, or something that's just been a foundational piece that's enabled it?
So yeah, I think you look at evolution in that respect, and Salesforce has been a platform foundation for our sales and customer interaction for a long time. And but the evolution is now to a more, instead of purely Salesforce point of view, to looking at overall data governance and how do you measure compliance with that data governance? How do you deal with data loss prevention? And things like products like RevCult, services that allow us to better understand that data specific to Salesforce, because let's face it, Salesforce is a very different kind of a SaaS product that's out there, and it's used so extensively. And we all know that the data that's kept in it is significantly important to the companies as a whole, because it's their lifeblood, it's their clients, it's their customers. So I think the evolution now is to be able to start looking at it from how do we protect Salesforce, not simply by saying only this person has access, but once the person does have access, do we now have visibility into what's happening to the data that's there? Simple things like insider threat needs to be considered. People leaving the company and what gets taken with them, and you can't see that simply from taking an access, identity and access management point of view. You have to take the next step to that data governance view and looking for data loss prevention avenues and so forth. And that starts with classification and identifying data, which is what RevCult gives you.
I think that's a really good point too, because the nature of how kind of there's some common stuff that we see every client uses Salesforce for, and then every client also does their own kind of individual thing as well. But the nature of the core of why most organizations start with Salesforce is those types of breaches and insider threat issues. They don't really rear their head in like front of the journal kind of issues very quickly, but you can really see long-term nasty effects of people walking away with their book of business and things like that. So now there's certainly some major stuff that also happens, but it's that ongoing oversight and governance and management of the system that becomes really, really critical when you're working with this type of data.
100%. 100%. And I know in the background,
something interesting about this poll that I'm seeing is like it's so indicative of the conversations that we have day to day, where I think I'm okay, and most of the time it's like, yeah, I think we're probably 80% of the way there. And then closing that rest of that gap can really kind of make a huge difference. But
see, I would challenge that viewpoint though, and say that most people that are saying they think they're there and they think they're okay probably are again taking the view of identity and access management, and therefore we restrict access to it. Therefore, it's secure. We're confident in our security, and they haven't necessarily matured to the point where they're looking at what's happening to that data once somebody has access to it.
I think that's a really good point, Pat. And it's funny, we were just having an internal conversation on a meeting like yesterday around something very similar, and it goes back to an earlier point about perspective, right? So one of the things that we were talking about is like if you go to a Salesforce COE or an admin or a developer and you say, how's your security? They're going to be like, yeah, we're good, because they implemented profiles and permission sets, and that's like the end of what security means to a Salesforce admin, right? I mean, not all, but if I paint with too broad of a brush, right, that's security in Salesforce for a lot of people. Whereas if you talk to an InfoSec person, they'll be like, yeah, we've got event monitoring, we're good, right? But it's all the things in between and coming in through the different lenses of that same kind of picture that security is a really, really, really big topic, and it's critical to remember that it means different things to different people, And I think that's the point you were making, Pat, is that, yeah, depending on who you are answering that question, you're like, yep, I got my profiles all set, or yep, I bought event monitoring. Ta-da! But there's so much more going on.
That's why it's
no,
important to
I think-
establish context. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
context matters. Context matters, right? It matters not just a little bit, but a lot. And I think there's a distinction between turning something on and actually having it reduce risk.
Oh, you want it to work too? Okay.
Oh, you
gotcha.
want it to actually do something, but it's
Yeah,
on.
gotcha.
And people say, yeah, I've got this thing on. Well, are you doing? Is it configured? Well, no, but it's on. Well, it's better than it not being on, but it's not really mitigating any risk. So, cool stuff. And this has been great. I know we're not going to get to questions, but I think there's a next as we go forward. There's some element for questions, but we're going to skip that. And we'll follow up with the folks individually and share at least some responses to the questions that have come in. If we could go to maybe, and I know everyone's waiting for hat raffle. I know, I can see. Even for those that haven't shared their video, I know you're waiting for hat raffle. But maybe why don't we do maybe a final takeaway across the team while I'm getting the hat raffle ready. Nicole, if you could slide forward, and then Thomas, why don't you start, and then you all can flow that, and then I'll get the hat stuff ready.
Yeah, if you look at the trends over IT over the last 20 years or so, there's this constant ebb and flow between insourcing and outsourcing. We got to outsource everything. All our competitors are doing it. Oh, look, they're building their own IT shop. Let's bring it back in house. That gives a strategic advantage. And I think cloud is just a nicer way of saying outsourcing or co-sourcing. I think the difference is in those other scenarios I described, the service wasn't good, or you were so 3 degrees removed from it, you didn't really have any control of it. And so the cloud gives you that flexibility, but also gives you some control of the situation where you can customize it, you can do different things. But in that same vein, you could hurt yourself. So I think that's what people don't realize, particularly in the business or now in my business, that they have asked me those questions. They've come to that realization, but they're taking the marketing aspect of it and thinking, oh, we just fire all these people and turn off all these servers and give it to them and we're good to go. But that's not the case at all. You might even have to ramp up in certain areas for certain skill sets, and you definitely have to invest in people and train them and get them up to speed on kind of where everything's going. But again, I just think it goes back to again, have a strategy, train your people, communicate well, be transparent with all levels of your organization, and measure things. So, and always focus on the risk. I think a lot of times people get hung up because security is complicated, and IT is complicated, but narrow it down to the risk and measure it, and I really think that's where you have to start.
How about you, Pat? Last or Jonathan, why don't we go with you, Jonathan? Key takeaways.
Yeah. So key takeaways. So focus on people. They are unfortunately our greatest vulnerability, but also our greatest asset, right? So make sure our people are trained adequately, promoting of information security as a culture across the organization. But also focusing on, continuous improvement, making sure that the people have access to, adequate training and resources that they need to be successful. Because ultimately, as we look at, things like Salesforce, the threat landscape is continuously changing, right? So making sure that, you don't have an end goal in mind for anything, especially, services that are cloud hosted, because you don't know what type of threats are on the horizon. So making sure that you have a good, threat intelligence and threat hunting program and are doing threat modeling on a continuous basis against your cloud service providers to make sure you are aware of new threats to the environment that may be, presenting new risks to the new environment that you have to go back and either apply controls to or adjust controls. So, having that continuous growth mindset and continuous improvement, I think is paramount for any information security program, especially in today's environment.
So I'm going to jump in and say that, you know, everything Thomas and Jonathan said is, you know, I agree with, very spot on, very appropriate advice. I'm going to go, you know, back to old school and reiterate again that the two pieces of advice. One is, you know, don't chase the shiny object or look for the next squirrel. Let's, you know, pay attention to our basics in security. If your basics are good to go, feel free to chase after those other things. But man, if you're not doing your basics, you need to take a step back and deal with it. And then, you know, Thomas has repeated several times a point that needs to be called out, and that's this idea of reactiveness versus strategy, and specifically business strategy, and being informed by the business what your strategy should be. And we need to do that. And we just had, you know, the pandemic is a cautionary tale, which basically those people that had to react had difficulty. Those people that had strategy in place for any kind of, you know, reasonably occurring kind of disaster or event or business continuity situation, you know, we survived. We did well. We dealt, we adapted, we moved on. You know, Semper Gumby, everything worked out. So, you know, don't wait for the next event to deal with things that you know you're not doing right now.
100%. So Pete, I'm gonna cut you off because I know we're running up on the time, and you know those 3 takeaways. So focus on the actual risk, focus on people and training, be proactive and reactive, basics versus not shiny objects. I think that's a wrapper. Along with my favorite, or not my favorite, lots of favorites, quote of the day: the cloud is great, but you could hurt yourself. Thomas, I think that's that may be a slogan that we may borrow going forward if you haven't trademarked it. So hat raffle, and the winner of the RevCult hat, Cynthia W. We'll follow up. If you have interest in a RevCult hat, we'll ask for your address if you're interested. This has been a lot of fun. Pete. This brown one, by the way, my wife was looking, doing some research on RevCult. This brown one is selling in the UK for $25.
Wow.
eBay. Yeah.
eBay.
Tell me about that.
So we'll make sure, Cynthia, we'll get you a hat. Pat, Thomas, Jonathan, it's been awesome to collaborate. Again, I know there's been a lot of questions. We'll make sure that we follow up with everybody, and this has been a great session. We're here, RevCult. I think there's going to be a survey for those that are attending for any additional help that we might be able to provide. And everybody enjoy the rest of your afternoon and night, and we will see you soon.
Had a great time. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, y'all. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.
Great stuff. Be good. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.